So the episode opens with this slow pan over a casino floor, and I mean, there's just dead bodies all over the place. And you got this one nervous waitress carrying a tray of drinks over to Chuck, who's just sitting there playing slot machines. They are really determined to make him a villain, damn it. The boys finally start hatching half of a plan, but decide they need Michael to help out with it. First stop, they're going to hell, where it turns out Rowena is now queen. And that offhand comment made several episodes earlier, yep, Michael is on the loose. We'll have you be Mike. He's inside a diner, actually, chilling out, eating some fries, when Lilith stops by. It doesn't go well for her. Well, the boys finally get him and give him a talk while Eileen gets a quest hook. Eventually, Dean and Castiel decide that they're going to go on the main quest to enact the plan, while Sam is going to go help Eileen with her side quest. Oopsie! Turns out the giver of that side quest is Chuck, and they have walked into a trap. What's going to happen next? Apologies for the delays with this one, everyone. I had a head cold, which wasn't necessarily that bad, but it completely shredded my throat, and it's kind of hard to do these if you can't talk much. If you have ever wondered what it would be like if I wrote an episode of Supernatural, here you go. Or at least, this is what I would write given constraints I'd have to work under. Sort of. I mean, when the guys all went trudging off down to hell, and I was nearly screaming at the screen that Michael was released when all the doors in hell were open. And then when the show finally bothered to confirm that, yeah, he was gone, he was out of there, I literally did scream out loud, finally! And that's probably my review of this episode summed up. An hour-long scream fest of finally at the screen. For one example, the boys finally admitting that they can't actually kill Chuck in any real way without it screwing up the whole universe, so they're going to have to try and lock him up for a little while. That's something I've been curious about this entire season, so it was nice to finally have the boys confirm it and see it in the text of the story. And if you want to say, of course the boys knew that, well, I would point out that it seemed kind of obvious that the boys should have known Michael was no longer in hell, but they still went down there to go check it out this episode. At this point, I'm assuming nothing about what the characters know or the rules say should be until it's explicitly spelled out. I do have to wonder if looking for clues to defeat Chuck in the Demon Tablet was the best idea, but regardless of that, I'm just thrilled the boys are thinking of how to use the resources they already have at hand, rather than the show inventing some new weapon that they have to go fetch. A perfect plot hook? No, it isn't, but when you enter the end game like the final season, you really do want to just use what the show has already invented rather than make up something new. I personally would have probably maybe brought in the Angel Tablet's remains. Then Donnie could repair it with a touch, but utilizing another tablet is at least a fair solution as far as the plot goes. Which brings me to my confession. I will admit that I was wrong. In my last review, I thought the show was just going to invent the whole new quest item that they would go fetch and then use to attack Chuck, and only to have it fail. But they didn't go that route. And that's good, because by now that had become a cliche of Supernatural's mid-season finales. I'll say it again. I was wrong, and I applaud the show very much for proving me wrong. Believe it or not, I actually prefer the show to surprise me and exceed my expectations. I was also wrong about the schedule, as I'd mixed some things up on the calendar, and we have about a 4-week break from here. As for the other canon revelations this episode, good for Rowena for being in charge of hell now. It's kind of interesting to me that even though she's been returned to life, Lilith has no interest in being in charge again. And I admit it was immensely satisfying watching her to finally get smited by a righteous archangel. There was a fan theory going around that, like Castiel and Jimmy, maybe Adam's soul had been taken out of his body and Mike was riding it solo and he got dragged back down into the cage. Well, this theory was pretty squashed in episode 611, Appointment in Samara, and now I'm wondering, Mike's vessel has a soul in it, a soul which has now been in hell. If Michael tries to go to heaven, which he should, because the angels need him up there just to power the place, can he? Or does the presence of a soul in his body that has been to hell lock him out of heaven until he, sheds the vessel? Oh, wait. It's almost like this retcon is stupid and causing far more problems than it is worth. This is why I always caution people about playing around with the rules in your canon, because often what seems like a good idea at the time begins damaging the story you're trying to tell much further down the road. An obvious rule of thumb is if your retcon requires additional retcons to work, it's a bad idea. Avoid it. I would have scored this episode 5 shells easy if there was a conversation where Michael was like, "What? Who told you that rule?" Well, that demon was lying his ass off. Speaking of, I have to admit, I really enjoyed Jake Stubble's performance as both Adam and Michael. He did a great job bringing a bit of character and nuance to two characters that, had been lacking in it. I especially like the moment where, after smiting Lilith, Michael just has the diner forget what had happened. Normally, I am not a fan of mind manipulation by the characters, but from things we've seen from the other Michaels, that was kind of a moment of mercy and restraint. The moment where Adam was kind of selling the Winchesters to Michael and pleading their case, that was kind of unearned. No more time than he got with his brothers. It didn't make a lot of sense, and that time in the show could have gone towards more character bonding. I would have liked to have seen Sam and Dean talking more with their lost brother, or Castiel and Michael discussing heaven and choices. Or heck, a moment between Michael and Dean talking about fathers growing up, other selves. Something like that could have been powerful, thought-provoking moments. Feels might have even been had. I certainly think Jake demonstrated enough skill that he could have carried a scene like that with Jensen. Regardless, I can't deny this episode finally gave me a Michael and an Adam I'd been wanting to see for a long time. It really makes me wish we had gone on a quest to rescue the lost brother a long time ago, or that this Michael had been released to be an arc villain another season. Not much else to add, as this was just a good, solid episode, finally bringing together all the various plot threads. I could probably quibble over Michael just snapping open a door to purgatory, but by this point, that's the least of the season's worries. With Dean and Cass off to purgatory, we have the opportunity to bring back several old characters. Benny seems definite since we've already seen him earlier in a vision. I'm kind of hoping for maybe Gordon and Madison. Who would you like to see return? So, all total, I have to give this episode 4.5 shells. It was really good, solid, arc advancing, but it stalled out in a few places, giving us conversations that could have been replaced with something more meaningful, more impactful. I mean, while it was kind of entertaining to see Rowena play the mom and telling Dean and Cass to get over it already, would have been stronger having the advice come from, say, Michael, who had 6 years trapped in a room with his brother and still couldn't patch things up with him. Had this episode taken advantage of more of the opportunities it had, would have been 5 shells easy. This season does show a lot of signs of effort, and the writer's trying. And I do appreciate the effort. A Merry Christmas for myself. Celebrate whatever you feel like this holiday. And I hope the next year is a great year for you. And hey, hang around here and we'll talk some Supernatural.